The software that safely guided the Apollo 11 lunar module to the surface of the moon was a physical object. It was a textile, woven by hand, and its hardware properties are why the mission succeeded. Early spaceflight presented a hostile environment, demanding precise, automated guidance logic that could process radar data in real time without failing. At the time, the standard technology for computer memory relied on electrostatic cathode ray tubes. They were fast but extremely volatile. A cosmic ray or power surge could cause an electrostatic tube to lose its charge, scrambling the flight software entirely. NASA needed memory that was physically incorruptible. They awarded the manufacturing contract to Raytheon, where highly experienced textile workers literally sewed the computer's logic bits into existence. The engineers called it LOL memory, little old lady memory. The binary logic was structurally permanent. Passing a copper wire through the center of a tiny ferrite ring included a 1. Bypassing the ring entirely encoded a 0. Because the code was dictated by the physical route of the copper wire, it could not be overwritten by electricity. When the Apollo computer became overwhelmed by radar data and threw the famous 1202 alarms, the core programming held firm. Making code a physical object saved the landing. But for the computer to actually calculate, it also needed memory that could be erased and rewritten on the fly. This shift required moving away from the physical path of the wire and relying entirely on the specific magnetic properties of the rings themselves. The bedrock of this erasable system is a tiny ceramic ferrite ring. When an electrical current flows through a wire intersecting its center, it generates a magnetic field. That current permanently magnetizes the ring in a specific direction. We define this clockwise magnetic field as state 1. If you reverse that current, you reverse the magnetic polarity of the ring. This counterclockwise field establishes state 0. This creates a unique engineering problem for reading the data. The ring holds its magnetic state without power, but it emits no light and makes no sound. There are no passive signals. The computer has no way to observe if the ring holds a 1 or a 0. To check the state, the computer has to actively interrogate the ring by forcing a 0 current through the wire. If the ring was already polarized as a 0, the magnetic field remains static. Nothing happens. But if the ring was holding a 1, forcing it to 0 causes its magnetic field to violently flip. This rapid shift in magnetism induces a sharp voltage spike down a separate diagonal diagnostic line called the sense wire. Physicist Anne Wang realized that the only way to observe the data was to destroy it. Once the core flipped to 0 to trigger that sense spike, the original bit was gone. Wang solved this with a write-after-read cycle. The instant the computer detects the voltage spike on the sense wire, it immediately fires a reverse current back through the center wire to restore the 1. This cycle handles individual bits perfectly, but dedicating separate control wires to read and write every single bit creates an impossible geometric bottleneck when building a complete computer. In the late 1940s, engineers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology faced this exact limit while designing the Whirlwind computer. To address 1,024 bits individually, they needed 1,024 dedicated control wires. Managing that 1-to-1 wiring ratio required an immense, fragile labyrinth of vacuum tube logic gates that would easily fill a room. MIT researcher Jay Forrester realized that routing individual wires to individual cores was a dead end. The memory needed a geometric redesign. Forrester arranged the independent cores into a tight XY coordinate grid, weaving horizontal and vertical wires through the rows and columns. This grid takes advantage of magnetic hysteresis. The ferrite material requires a strict threshold of electrical current to flip its polarity. If you send exactly half of that required current down a wire, the magnetic field is disturbed, but it fails to flip. It remains unchanged. Forrester used this behavior to create coincident-current addressing. By sending half current down a horizontal X row and simultaneously down a vertical Y column, only the core at the exact overlap receives the combined full current, flipping the polarity of that specific ring. Other cores on the active X and Y lines remain static, receiving only subthreshold half current. This massively reduces the architecture. Instead of 1,024 individual paths, the grid only requires perimeter control wires. 32 horizontal plus 32 vertical equals just 64 control pins. Forrester exploited the physical limits of magnetism to solve a geometric routing problem. By turning an electrical threshold into a spatial coordinate system, random access memory became architecturally viable. Computers process data in words made of multiple bits, which required scaling this 2D grid into a 3-dimensional block. A 16-bit word requires a stack of 16 core planes, with the X and Y coordinate lines plunging vertically through all of them simultaneously. This coordinate system creates a conflict when addressing the 3D stack. If the X and Y lines activate the same location across 16 planes, every bit in that word is forced to a 1 simultaneously. The solution is the inhibit wire, a single continuous line threaded through every core on one specific plane. During a write cycle, the system wants to flip a column of cores to a 1. To keep a specific core at 0, the computer sends a negative half-current pulse through that plane's inhibit wire. Flowing in the opposite direction, it mathematically cancels out the positive half-current provided by the X wire. The net current arriving at that specific core drops back to 0.5. It fails to reach the hysteresis threshold and remains a 0. By stacking matrix dimensions and mastering current cancellation, engineers constructed dense, addressable, non-volatile RAM entirely out of wire and ceramic, without a single moving part. The Apollo guidance computer utilized this architecture, relying on erasable coincident-current RAM for its working memory and woven core rope ROM for flight software. But core memory faced a hard manufacturing limit. The ferrite rings could only scale down so far, because human hands or specialized machines still had to thread physical copper wires through them and fold them into epoxy blocks. During the 1970s, the computing industry shifted away from magnetic rings entirely. The arrival of silicon semiconductors allowed engineers to replace the ferrite magnets with microscopic transistors and capacitors etched directly onto wafers. Yet, despite the change in materials, the logic survived. The XY coordinate grid used in coincident-current addressing remains the exact blueprint for addressing data inside modern silicon chips. This graphic compares the volumetric data density of 1960s magnetic cores to modern flash memory. On the left is an IBM 1401 core plane. On the right is a standard microSD card. The amount of physical space required to store 64 individual bits of data in the 1960s now holds 64 billion bytes. The physicality of computing is largely hidden from us today, locked away in microscopic silicon wafers. If you enjoy uncovering the hardware engineering that built the modern world, subscribe for more deep dives. The software running on the device in your pocket feels invisible and weightless, but the architecture organizing that data is directly descended from the woven, physical hardware that navigated humanity to the moon.